an MRE customer. Conditions apply. Call 632-2613 for details. MRE, the smarter choice.
Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but many times we're not given a chance to share it with anyone. Not here. The Ray Gibson Show wants your opinion. Heck, we need your opinion. Any speaker, anytime. Call 888-8255. That's 888-TALK. Speak your mind on any issue because your opinion matters. 888-8255. That's 888-TALK for The Ray Gibson Show on Guam's only News Talk Superstation, 93.3 The Point.
And the Ad Council.
Airport-style security is coming to the subway system in Los Angeles.
LA Metro's been working with the Transportation Security Administration to test out different technologies, and MTA spokesman Dave Sotero says they've decided to purchase 5 passive millimeter wave body scanners.
This particular technology showed promise in being able to detect weapons and explosive devices in busy transit stations where you have a lot of people going through the station at the same time.
TSA spokesman Michael Bolello says it uses a person's body waves to detect objects on a body or in a bag.
When there's something that's dense, like an IED or a suicide vest, that will keep the waves from emitting.
He says transportation officials around the country became more aware after a man detonated an explosive device in a New York subway station last December. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
In the Philadelphia suburb of Cheltenham, Pennsylvania, several people were shot in the checkout lines of a Walmart store Tuesday evening. A store manager, a cashier, and at least one customer wounded. The gunman fled, but not very far.
A short time later, the suspects crashed into the rear of a Philadelphia police car, and they were taken into custody. Along the way, they threw the gun from the vehicle, and we did recover the gun.
That's Cheltenham's Police Chief John Fry. The motive for that shooting at Walmart isn't known yet. There are 35 people known dead in the collapse of a bridge in Genoa, Italy. Speaking through a translator, Italy's Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte promising to take steps to prevent a similar tragedy.
It's necessary that the maintenance is even more strict and the checks are even more punctual and rigorous. We must prevent such tragedies from happening. All citizens should be able to travel safely, and we will work to prevent this from happening again.
A 160-foot section of the bridge collapsed Tuesday. Searchers are still combing through the wreckage, fearful of finding more victims. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News Radio.
Half a day. This is Jerry Gutierrez. Many remember how committed Carl has been to helping our people during times of hardship, disaster, and financial crisis throughout his years of public service. For Carl, it has always been about people helping people. He would like this opportunity to work on your behalf once again as your governor. I humbly ask for your vote for the Gutierrez-Bordallo team on August 25th. Together, let's make Guam again.
I'm Carl Gutierrez, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Team Sunshine 2018, Roy P. Duenas, Treasurer.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitsky, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitsky.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, and that's where we start every day, indicating that we have a strong devotion to the Bill of Rights to the United States Constitution, the Second Amendment being one of those. I often just take this time to disagree with Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia and his interpretation of the Second Amendment. Suffice it to say that the Supreme Court has held that a person has the right to keep arms in his home, a personal right to keep arms in his home as a matter of self-defense. So that will be what we call the Tall Tales rule for today. So we're here at 888-8255. I don't think I'm on Facebook Live right now. If I am, I can't see it myself. So if I'm not, that doesn't mean that you can't call 888-8255 and be a part of the program. and I hope you do. We operate according to something like a script here, a program. It is on? Okay, all right. So the real Joe Cruz has told me that we are on Facebook Live, even though I can't see it on my screen here, and I can't tune it in on my on my iPad. But the real Joe Cruz, unlike the host of Tall Tales, always knows what he's talking about, especially when he's talking about the lyrics for one of my favorite songs, Dave Brubeck's Take 5. So we are on Facebook Live, so comment away, and I'll figure out, perhaps by the time the program's over, I'll figure out a way to be able to read your comments and possibly even respond to your comments. So as you remember, Tall Tales is an interactive audience participation show where we try to talk about the issues of the day in such a manner that we bring light where light is seldom admitted. We bring light to dark corners. Oh, okay. I have been able to pull up Tall Tales. I haven't been able to get to the comments part, but don't let that stop you. So, as I've mentioned before, we have 24 default subjects here on our Tall Tales list of things to talk about. Things like Guam can never become a state, being a senator is a 24/7 job, political parties should pay for the primaries, the governor has so much power that the legislature must be full-time to keep him in check, things like that. But that's numbers 1 through 24, but perhaps the most important numbers on the list are 0 and 00. This is how 0 reads. Bob doesn't know what he's talking about, and 00 is Bob still doesn't know what he's talking about. So anytime that you hear something coming from me that you disagree with, you may call me on it at your convenience. And it does happen from time to time, and there have been times when, if you were watching on Facebook Live, you would see little black feathers in the corners of my mouth because I had to eat crow and admit that I was wrong. So we do have a script here, a default script, and the program has regular features. We usually start out with Zemi Ikotny, which is my backwards translation for Meet the Press. And that's when we compare the editorials of our two daily newspapers and give the best one the coveted Blue Star Award, oftentimes unmercifully criticizing the one that doesn't get the Blue Star, which may happen today, maybe not. And then we also have what I call the card, which tells who's fighting with whom. And the card actually could be structured like a court calendar because it shows who versus whom. That's usually pretty entertaining. We have our big halftime show at 5 o'clock where we have the marching bands, cheerleaders, synchronized card sections in the grandstand, etc. Even though the show is highly structured, we entertain whatever our callers want to talk about. So you don't feel that you would be gumming up the works, so to speak, if you called and wanted to talk about something that wasn't on the script, because this is an audience participation show, and sometimes the callers lead us to some things that are more interesting than what I had scheduled to talk about today. Yesterday, for instance, we had a caller who gave us some really interesting facts about some numbers at Guam Memorial Hospital that I'll get back to when we get into the card. So once again, 888-8255. I'm going to go now to that portion of the show called Zemi Ikotny. And what we're looking for here is editorials that are hard-hitting, edgy, topical, editorials that make you think, editorials that make you say, boy, gosh, those guys are right. Someone should do something about that. That's what we're looking for. We don't always find it. Today being a prime example of that. We start out with the Daily News. The Daily News you won't have to be on the edge of your chair as you listen to my description of today's Daily News editorial. The title is Our View. Register today to select your government leaders. Today is the last day to register for the primary election. So if you're a new voter or haven't voted in the last 2 elections, we urge you to sign up and participate in running the government. There are 47 individual candidates and 5 gubernatorial teams running in the primary election, which will be held on August 15th. There's really no need to go much farther with it. I think everybody knows what the primary election is about. You can register at your village mayor's office or at the election commission. As of June 30, there were 51,382 registered voters. If you aren't registered, it's pretty easy. You can't be serving a prison sentence or be judicially declared insane or in a mental institution. So that lets out probably all of the Tall Tales, the life members of the Tall Tales Buff Society. You got to be a U.S. citizen, and you got to be 18 on election day, and you have to have lived here for 30 days. And there's a call to action here at the end of the editorial. Take part in your government. Register to vote if you haven't already, and head to the polls on August 25. So I'm going to level the same criticism at the Daily News today that I have in the last several days. This is just a news story disguised as an editorial. Perhaps the editorial board at the Daily News had kind of run out of its creativity quota for today. So took what is basically just standard news and called it an editorial. And we shift to the Post editorial. Tuesday's traffic gridlock, a reminder and a forewarning. On Tuesday afternoon, all northbound traffic slowed to a near total freeze. Numerous vehicles, a 2-deck trailer, motorists heading to work, parents on their way to pick up kids from school or run errands, came close to a standstill as traffic moved inch by inch in the afternoon heat along Marine Corps Drive in East Agania. And the editorial goes on to point out that the jam even slowed down an ambulance, probably on an emergency mission. And in the editorial, it also points out that there was apparently a paint spill on Marine Corps Drive that caused the backup. And then there's something of a call to action. The plan to build on, as you were, one of the main points of the project, backing up a little more, these gridlocks offer reminders of a plan, Tejan Parkway, Phase 2, that still awaits implementation after at least a decade of planning. One of the main points of the project was to provide an alternative route should Marine Corps Drive from East Agania to Tamuning become impassable, which apparently it was. The plan was to build Phase 1 of the Parkway, which is a relatively new stretch of road from Route 8 near the Cars Plus intersection, connecting with Airport Road. That part is finished. It's not exactly what you would call a freeway. It's 4 lanes in part. A large section of it is only 2 lanes. They've got a nice merging feature into Route 8 on the Route 8 end of the Parkway. The other end of the Parkway just dumps you at the airport. I don't think that was part of the design. I think that's just where they perhaps ran out of money or ran out of plans. The second phase of Tejon Parkway was to provide a road link from Route 8 all the way to the traffic light by the Home Depot on Airport Road to ease congestion and provide an alternative path to East Agania. There were issues that kept the local government from proceeding with the plan, including the acquisition of right-of-way from affected private landowners. But the years have gone by. These and other wrinkles should have been sorted out by now. The estimated cost for Phase 2 was $26.9 million and $212. A study offered a plan in which the project would be paid entirely with federal funds, with the exception of costs to acquire right-of-way from cliffline property owners. This issue is probably too late for the current administration to get the project moving. But the next administration and the next set of lawmakers should put this issue on their boxes to check off. Tuesday's incident was a reminder and a forewarning. Well, it's pretty weak, but it does make some points, and it does fit into the category. I hadn't thought about that before. I use Tejon Parkway quite often, and I'm kind of what's called a rat runner. I'm always looking for shortcuts and ways to avoid traffic and ways to get around traffic jams. For instance, Hamburger Highway, when it first opened, was a great place for rat runners, but as more and more people discover it, it becomes more and more congested. So it would be very nice if Tejon Parkway were finished so you could go all the way from Route 8 all the way up to the foot of Mechechi Hill there by the airport. A couple of other things, as long as we're being highway planners today. Wouldn't it be nice if you could get to from the airport to all of the businesses down in Harmon, what used to be called Harmon Field, without having to go the long way around down to Marine Corps Drive and then into Harmon Field? And wouldn't it be nice if Hamburger Highway were connected with the rest of Harmon Field? Nice to have. Probably won't see it for a while. Getting back to Meet the Press, it wasn't very much competition today, but here's that famous blue pencil, and it's going to be a pretty small blue star today because it wasn't much of a victory for the Post. But they did win. So from there, we can go to the card. And I've got the usual suspects here on the card. Les Paul Gibson versus Chet Atkins Fender. Chamorro versus Chamorro. Which one won? And Chamorro versus Chamorro?
Chamorro.
Chamorro won, okay. And, of course, Palookaville versus Guam. I've explained Palookaville before. I'll hold off on further explanations of just exactly where Palookaville is until it's necessary for someone to have to make that rather unhappy trip to Palookaville. And I suspect that after we get through the primary, there will be a one-way ticket to Palookaville or two. First on my card here today is the legislature versus an effective, efficient government that provides basic services in accordance with the rule of law on at least a break-even basis. Something that, a mantra that I repeat on almost every occasion. I try to work it into whatever testimony I present to the legislature whenever we start talking about government efficiency. It's the touchstone upon which I think the conversation can turn. An effective, efficient government that provides basic services in accordance with the rule of law on at least a break-even basis. So that means that there are probably a lot of things that a government can do that would be nice to have, but they don't fall within the rubric of basic government services. We could debate a little bit about what basic government services are. I don't think there would be too much of an argument if we said things like protection, police and corrections and fire, basic government services. Health care ought to be a basic government service, but it doesn't seem to be in the time in which we're living. It's something that everybody wants, but is not available to everyone, primarily because of the shortcomings of our hospital. And it wasn't in the beginning, but we now, I think, see education as a basic government service. Here in Guam, we've gone so far as to enact a statute called the Every Child is Entitled to an Adequate Public Education. And that statute lays out the 14 basic elements of an adequate public education. So those three certainly are basic government services. When we get farther afield from that, I, for one, I have publicly waived any desire that I might have for a senior citizens division at the Department of Public Health and Social Services, even though I am a pretty senior citizen. So at one time, I thought we were going to get forced into that, what I call good government and effective, efficient government, etc. I thought we were going to get forced into it because senators were holding the line on no increase in taxes, and there was a certain amount of pique, P-I-Q-U-E, that I detected on the part of senators who became at least mildly angry because the governor would only say, give me more money, and not change the way he was doing things. He kept hiring people. He brought foreign nesters on board so that they could continue to draw a paycheck when they ran for senator. I think it was just on Monday that he brought 4 more employees on board, including Elizabeth Kelly Bowman, to be his special assistants. So the governor continues to spend money attempting to say that we have a financial emergency, but the only way the financial emergency can be dealt with is to shrug it off onto the backs of the people by increasing taxes. Well, it appeared that the senators were going to hold a line on that and not increase taxes. Senator Michael San Nicolas had a pretty imaginative idea that if 3 government agencies, including the governor's office, wanted to be funded, they should go out and collect taxes that hadn't been collected. That kind of thinking, whether you like it or not, whether it's sound fiscal policy or not, does move us in the direction of what I have defined as good government. At one point in the budgetary process, I thought a gigantic step had been taken, and that was to eliminate the position of deputy director from next year's budget. There'd be no funding for deputy directors. And you'll recall that Will Castro spoke out vehemently against that, saying it's just not right to single out a group of people and say that, you know, come a certain day, you won't have a job anymore. If that provision had stuck in the budget, it would have been the first time, at least that I'm aware of, that we had gotten so serious about reorganizing the government or economizing the government that it would have meant that someone would not have a job in the process. As has been pointed out several times, the real action in designing these budgets is to avoid the L word, the F word, and the T word at all costs. No layoffs, no furloughs, no terminations. So no matter what, everybody who has a government job now must have a government job, perhaps forever, because no one wants to see jobs eliminated on his job and his watch. Certainly no governor does. So we actually would have crossed that bridge with this deputy director provision. We would have taken a step towards that effective, efficient government. But when it came to the end of the game, senators decided that they would make that provision effective come the next administration, come at the time that the new administration is sworn in on January 6th. What happens between now and then is an open question. What will happen after that? Will there be a mad race to put deputy directors, funding for deputy directors back into the budget? An interesting question. So that's the first item on today's card. Got a break coming up here. I hear something that sounds a little bit like Take 5. So we'll take a short break and we'll come back to the next item on the card.
John Gibson, Digging Up History. How a pie plate and an oddball invention became an American toy giant. The real story behind the, well, I'll tell you that right after this. Are you one of the millions who feel trapped by your Obamacare health insurance? If you are, dump it. President Trump has changed Obamacare mandates, and now you can get the health care insurance you need, not the overpriced ripoff Obama forced you into. Call Amy Yarborough, a licensed health insurance broker. She'll save you money and get you the health insurance you need. Call Amy at 817-914-5835. Amy, 817-914-5835. Now back to my story. A guy named Walter Fredrickson was trying to cash in on the 1950s space craze in America. He invented a flying plastic toy he called the Pluto Platter. One day, Fredrickson was selling the Pluto Platter out of the trunk of his car when two young guys who had just founded a toy company called Whammo saw his toy and made him a deal to buy the rights. The Whammo guys figured college guys would love the platter. They were right. They found people on the Yale campus had been playing with a similar toy, metal pie plates. Not wanting to hurt anyone, when they threw the pie plate, they called out a warning, the name of the pie company. The Whammo guys said, "That's it," which is why today you have the Frisbee, after the Frisbee Pie Company. I'm John Gibson, Digging Up History.
Sizzling hot, that's what our special summer loan is, with rates as low as 4% and amounts up to $50,000. You can use your money for whatever you want, like back to school expenses, tuition, travel, or paying down expensive credit cards. A sizzling hot special summer loan with great rates as low as 4% at Bank Pacific today.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal Credit Opportunity Lender. Conditions apply. As low as 4% APR.
Now, more Tall Tales with Bob Klitsky. Spitting truth like watermelon seeds at a summer picnic. Call now, 888-TALK, 888-8255.
So we're back, and I'm going back to the card. The next bout on the card is Nelson versus the Attorney General. There's a report in today's Daily News about Senator Nelson asking the Attorney General for an update. And the Attorney General, of course, is stuck by her guns, saying, respectfully, I am unable to comment, which kind of typifies most of her responses to the issues that have come before her during the time that she's been Attorney General. Nelson said, out of fairness to the community and to Tenorio, the matter must be urgently resolved. Tenorio is a Republican candidate for governor. And I heard the host of the morning radio program here on The Point, that is the Ray Gibson show, questioning Ray Tenorio at the Candidates Forum on Saturday, suggesting to Ray, you know, there's a cloud hanging over your campaign because of what I call, and a lot of other people call, the Glock Party incident. There you go, yeah. And Ray suggested, one of the Rays suggested to the other Ray that maybe Ray ought to ask the Attorney General to do something with that matter because, as it is, it's a cloud hanging over his campaign. And the receiving Ray said, no, the matter has to take its course. I have faith in our system, etc. So I guess that was a little ray of sunshine there at the Saturday forum. It's interesting to see the quotes from the Attorney General, the candidates for Attorney General that appeared in this same article. The three candidates running for Attorney General asked how they would respond to Nelson's request during a forum held by the Guam Bar Association Monday at the Guam Museum. Attorney Levin Camacho said Barrett Anderson should provide a status update, but he said he understands that if she said it is still under investigation. He said prosecutors can't comment on cases under investigation. While no one is above the law and everyone wants to have faith the system is going to work, while no one is above the law and everyone wants to have faith that the system is going to work, everyone has a right to a fair trial, Camacho said. Commenting on a case under investigation could put the person on trial through a news story, and that isn't the way the justice system works. Former Attorney General Douglas Moylan said he doesn't believe that there are any ethical rules that outright prohibit prosecutors from talking about a case. But he said until a jury finds Tenorio guilty, he is presumed innocent. Attorney Gary Gumatauta said his position has been clear about the incident. Grab a gun, you go to jail. I mean it. This is not a game. He said the incident involved felonies and people could have been hurt. He mentions that he was close to Tenorio's mother, but if he has to be prosecuted, if a grand jury comes back with a true bill, he will move forward to charging Tenorio, and I understand that. But of course, cases don't get to the grand jury. Criminal cases are not self-propelled when it comes to the grand jury. The only way a case gets before the grand jury is if the prosecutor takes it before the grand jury, makes a presentation to the grand jury asking for an indictment. And if 12 members of that grand jury come back with a true bill, then there is an indictment and the case moves forward through whatever prosecution entails, down to usually a jury verdict one way or the other. Of course, jury verdicts aren't the only way that people in the criminal justice system are found guilty. Sometimes criminal defendants plead guilty. We read in the papers all the time about plea bargaining, etc. But in this particular case, Gary Gumatauta was pretty clear. Now, my own 2 cents worth is this. Elizabeth Barrett Anderson keeps saying the case is under investigation. So let's deconstruct that a little bit. When she says the case, make sure I'm quoting her correctly here. She just said, respectively, I am unable to comment in her response. So if she's unable to comment because the case is under investigation, then I think we all have a right to say, okay, what exactly are you investigating? Because it would seem from what we know from television and newspaper reports that this ought to be a really easy investigation. because whatever crimes, if any, were committed in the presence of police officers who want to be very good witnesses in any investigation, since that's what they do for a living. It would not be that difficult to determine who was there. There was some surveillance footage of the incident that would be part of the investigation. So it would seem that that investigation should have been wrapped up pretty rapidly. Now, if the reason that we don't know any more now than we did on the night of the Glock party, except what we've seen in the media, if the reason is that the investigation is completed, but the Attorney General and her prosecutors have not decided what to do, that's, to me, that is a completely different story. The old saying is that justice delayed is justice denied, and if it were determined that Tenorio should be prosecuted, we all know that the primary is coming up on the 25th and the general is on November 6th. So if it would appear to anyone that this matter was deliberately slowed down or deliberately speeded up for political reasons, it would not bring an element of respect to the criminal justice process. So, like everybody else, I want the Attorney General to do something, to take some action, or tell us that she's not going to take any action. One way or the other, let's move on with it. Yesterday, or last night's online edition of the Daily News had an interesting story that Tall Tales buffs found out about before it broke in the news. The story is entitled, "One Missing Word in Budget Bill Spells Big Difference." And the story goes on to say, a word is missing from the 2019 budget bill, which could impact the government's ability to hire teachers, nurses, doctors, engineers, and similar positions next year. But Speaker Cruz said the missing word "no" was a clerical error. Now, I list this story on the card as humility versus dignity. Now, those of you who were listening yesterday know what happened. And what happened is this, reading from the statute on page 125, section 12, restrictions on hiring unclassified employees unless otherwise authorized by this chapter. Government funds of any kind or description may be expended for employment or hiring unclassified employees except for the following. And then there's a laundry list of exceptions to include the Guam Department of Education. Now, I've got a phone call coming in here. Perhaps it's the Attorney General wanting to tell me what the disposition of the Glock party incident is. Good afternoon. Thanks for calling Tall Tales.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry to disappoint Tom, but it's just Andre being there.
Hey.
Hey, you know, I'm not one of those guys who calls every day, but your show is just so interesting. I wanted to ask, kind of give a comment and then ask a question, and then just listen and kind of to your answer. So there's been a little bit discussion in the United States about prosecutorial discretion and how the prosecuting office or the prosecutor's office is cutting deals, and they're constantly cutting deals with the threat of, well, if we go to trial, you're going to have a longer sentence. But these prosecutorial deals that they cut, what that does is that it kind of denies, in essence, the person from actually going through the system and making sure that the system, I guess, is fair, is working, and they receive some justice, whether or not, you know, they're guilty or not. The system works. But since, you know, they're starting to cut deals and they say, well, if you don't take the 2 years, we can go to court. It's going to be expensive, and you might get 15 to 25. So take the deal, and that's just the way it's been done. And there's been some talk about trying to reform that. So my question then is we see prosecutorial discretion here with this Attorney General. She's, after all, a prosecutor. for the people. And we saw that when it came to the raises that were found to be illegal. And instead of kind of letting the law take its course and prosecuting, she decides to just give him some advice and say, just return it and it's all good. So are we seeing this with the Attorney General? And it's not just with this, but with other cases on Guam, and then maybe this is what's happening maybe with the Tenorio case. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on this whole thing and how it works. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's why I tune into your show, Bob, trying to get some knowledge.
Oh, okay, well, thanks for bringing that up, Andrew.
Thanks. I'll hang up in this one.
Prosecutorial discretion and plea bargaining have probably been with the criminal justice system since we've had a criminal justice system. Starting out, the prosecutor, whoever that might be, has an absolute discretion as to who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. Now, the typical American system, you have in each county, you have someone called either a district attorney or a state's attorney, and prosecution is usually done at that level. So let's say you have a county that has 15 cities and 4 villages and several square miles of unincorporated area called towns that have their own police forces. If someone is arrested by any one of those jurisdictions, that person would be the police would do their investigation, make the arrest, and forward those papers to the district attorney. The district attorney would decide whether or not he had a case to prosecute, and if he did, and it's a felony, then he would get an indictment and go forward with the prosecution. Plea bargaining means that the prosecutor sits down with the defense attorney, and if it's a felony, there will be a defense attorney, and they will arrive at some sort of a mutual agreement. And part of the plea bargaining often is if you go to trial and you lose, this is what you could be looking at. For instance, a 25-year sentence. But we will let you plead to a lesser included offense, and instead of looking at 25 years, you'll be looking at, say, 5 to 10. Sometimes part of the plea agreement is the prosecutor will agree with defense counsel as to what recommendation the prosecution will make for sentencing. Sometimes there's no recommendation. The sentencing, of course, the length of sentence is strictly up to the judge, who can give whatever weight he feels or she feels is appropriate to the recommendations of the prosecution. So that's the basic system for prosecutorial discretion. And put it this way, as a practical matter, our criminal justice system would grind to a halt if everyone who is indicted for a felony took his case to trial. The system is not big enough to handle it. I don't have an exact figure at my fingertips, but I suspect that more than 90% of felony indictments do, as we say, plead out. So that's prosecutorial discretion in a nutshell. Going back to our Attorney General and her unwillingness to prosecute anyone for the illegal retroactive raises, that was not an exercise of discretion. It was an exercise of non-discretion, which I'll come back to after I take this caller that's holding on line 1. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Bob. This is Jack.
Hey, Jack, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Actually, my question deals with what we talked about last week about voting rights.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so the numbers are out. I guess this is the highest that we've had in new voter registration.
That's what I heard, yeah.
So remember I asked you the question about the qualifications and it has to be a U.S. citizen?
Yes.
Okay, so I come to find out that you don't have to show proof of U.S. citizenship. What you do is you sign an affidavit.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering, how good are we at monitoring the qualifications for voter registrations here? If the litmus test is a driver's license or a valid school ID, and the only thing you have to do is sign an affidavit on U.S. citizenship.
Well, of course, if you sign an affidavit or declaration under penalty of perjury and you're lying, there's a serious criminal penalty that attaches. But this is all part of, I'm going to be partisan here, all part of the Democrat Party in the states moving to eliminate any kind of voter identification when people go to the polls. If the Democrats had their way, you wouldn't even need to show your ID when you show up to vote to show the people running the polls that you are, in fact, Jack Smith or whoever you are. So
yes,
that wave is swept here. Now, of course, here, ever since I started voting here, you've had to show your identification at the polls, and I don't think that's changed. So if, for instance, I went and registered and I said that my name was Jack McClukenbach, when I went to vote, I'd have to have a picture ID that said that my name was Jack McClukenbach. But I find it worrisome too, Jack.
Yeah, I do, especially since it's a high new voter registration. And because now that we have Clint Ridgell running, I don't mind. I thought it was a great thing, and I thought they might be a new variable that we need to consider. But then having think of it, and when you mentioned that you had to be a U.S. citizen, for some reason that didn't click with me, because when I registered was back in 1980s. I'm sorry, back in the 80s. And so if I forgot what the procedure was back then, and I've been voting ever since, if I forgot the U.S. citizenship part. But now that you've mentioned it, and I look at the numbers coming in, I have to pause on whether or not some of these new...
Let's pick this up after the break, okay, Jack?
Okay, I'll listen on the other end because I'm on the road.
Okay.
Okay, tell me why you've come in today.
I yell uncontrollably at my radio every morning.
I see.
Is it serious?
Not at all. You have opinionitis.
Opinionitis?
Yep, but it's easily treatable.
How?
Just call the Ray Gibson Show each morning and share your opinion. Don't let opinionitis bring you down. Share your opinions on the Ray Gibson Show by calling 888-8255. The Ray Gibson Show, weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on Guam's only News Talk Superstation, 93.3 The Point.
So, talking about voting and whether or not a person has to be a United States citizen, yes, you must be a United States citizen to vote on Guam. Jack, in one of his earlier calls, mentioned that he thought that the fact that Clinton was running might mean that more citizens of the FSM might be voting in our elections. And I pointed out to him that in order to vote here, one has to be a U.S. citizen, and people coming from the Federated States of Micronesia are not U.S. citizens, so they would not be eligible to vote. People coming from the freely associated states are what are called habitual residents. Being a habitual resident does not qualify one for naturalization. So the only people coming from the FSM or with an FSM origin that would be able to vote in a Guam election would be someone who was born here, whose parents were habitual residents and journeyed here from Truk. I think it'll be a while before there will be going into identity politics. Again, politicians will recognize a block of voters from Chuk, but it's possible, I suppose. So I hope that answered your question, Jack. I'm going to go back to the earlier call, Andre's call about prosecutorial discretion, and I hope I covered that for you, Andre. But one of the things that you mentioned was Elizabeth Barrett Anderson and the governors giving illegal retroactive salary increases to people in his cabinet and directors. And that never got prosecuted, and here's what happened as best I can remember. The Attorney General issued an opinion and said, yes, these things are illegal. But then she turned around and said, but I can't prosecute it for ethical reasons because I've already determined that it's illegal. Causing me to wonder, well, if you determined it was illegal, why horse around with an opinion? Why didn't you just prosecute, Madam Attorney General? Now, of course, there is a chief prosecutor in the Attorney General's office. It's not Elizabeth Barrett Anderson. It's another person. But Elizabeth Barrett Anderson is the boss. She's the Attorney General. She's the elected official. So everything that happens in the Attorney General's office that shouldn't, or everything that doesn't that should, basically comes back to her. So she didn't prosecute it. She said that what we need is a special prosecutor, Elizabeth said, because of her conflict or her ethical problem. So the Attorney General set out to hire a special prosecutor. It didn't go well. It never happened. So here we sit with no special prosecutor and those offenses still prosecutable, because although there would have been a 3-year statute of limitations on what was involved, the statute is tolled, T-O-L-L-E-D, tolled, so long as the person who violated the law in his official capacity is still in the government, and the 3 years only begins when that person leaves the government. Excuse me. So that might have been an interesting question to pose to the three Attorney General candidates that we have right now. Are you going to prosecute those people that Attorney General Elizabeth Barrett Anderson never prosecuted? We'll see. So if there's anything more you'd like to know about prosecutorial discretion and plea bargaining, etc., this is the place to ask. 888-TALK, 888-8255. So I'm going to go back into what I was reading from the Daily News, which I have listed on the card here as humility versus dignity. And I read from the statute that showed that because a word no is missing, it, as the word no will do, reverse the polarity of the section and also of the exceptions. So because the word no is not included in front of no, it should read like this: no government funds of any kind may be expended for employment of unclassified employees, except for the following, and then a list of accepted positions to include certified persons at the Department of Education as identified in Section 715.1, Chapter 7, Title 1. So because the word no is not included in the statute, it reversed the polarity of the exceptions so that the exceptions became the prohibited activity, and what should have been the prohibited activity was permitted, if you can wade your way through that thicket of verbiage. And when I discussed it yesterday, I trotted out an old rule of statutory construction called equity of statute. And that rule, equity of statute, means that a court can act on what it what one would conclude must have been the legislative intent, even though the plain meaning of the words would contradict that intent. So if you read this section here, it doesn't read right without the word no. You can understand what it means, but it's very awkward. And when you read it, you say, somebody made a mistake here and left out the word no. So under the doctrine of equity of statute, if this matter ever came before a court, the court would say, this statute will be read as though the word no, which was mistakenly omitted, is included. So what happened in this particular case was that when the governor noticed that the word no wasn't there, Speaker Cruz wrote him a letter and said, there was a time when the heads of each of our respective branches acknowledged human error for what it was and permitted the other to correct such error with dignity, Cruz wrote. Whether you believe we have earned it or not, I ask you to allow the 34th Guam Legislature to do that now. Earlier on, the letter said, well, I'll come back to this letter after we go through our big halftime show. And after our big halftime show, we're also going to get into the Chamorro Land Trust. So if you want to talk about the Chamorro Land Trust scandal, that's coming up after I finish here with the equity of statute. It's time now for our big halftime show. Acrobats, cheerleaders, cannon fire, you name it, we got it.
The point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Manafort trial nearing its end. I'm Jack Callahan. Fox News closing arguments later this morning after Paul Manafort's attorneys rested their case Tuesday in his bank fraud trial without a single witness.
Testimony came to an abrupt end. Paul Manafort's defense team resting its case without offering any new evidence or putting the defendant on the stand. Attorney Kevin Downing explaining to reporters.
I believe the government has failed to meet their burden of proof, and we've rested on that.
Prosecutors spent 2 weeks laying out a case that Manafort used offshore accounts and signed misleading loan applications in an attempt to hide millions of dollars from the IRS. Manafort's former business partner, Rick Gates, who accepted a plea deal, told jurors the two did commit crimes. Defense attorneys raised questions about Gates' credibility, pointing out an extramarital affair and embezzlement.
Fox's Jared Halpern. A week after the voting ended, the Republican primary for governor in Kansas has come to its end, with the state's incumbent Governor Jeff Collier conceding to Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach.
Tracy and I will not challenge this in court, nor will we be asking for a recount.
The margin of victory, 345 votes. There had been 311,000 votes cast. President Trump endorsed Kobach the day before the election. Governor Collier has now endorsed Kobach as well in his race against Democrat Laura Kelly in November. In this week's primary, Congressman Keith Ellison has won the Democratic nomination for the Attorney General's race in Minnesota. This despite a last-minute allegation of domestic abuse.
They're not true. But tonight is about the victory, so we're going to focus on that. We'll be talking about this other stuff in the next few days.
Vermont Democrat voters have picked Christine Hallquist as their candidate for governor this fall. She would be the nation's first transgender governor, were she to beat incumbent Phil Scott in November. Asian stocks have closed lower. Dow futures down about 20. Fox News, fair and balanced.
Half a day. This is Jerry Gutierrez. Many remember how committed Carl has been to helping our people during times of hardship, disaster, and financial crisis throughout his years of public service. For Carl, it has always been about people helping people. He would like this opportunity to work on your behalf once again as your governor. I humbly ask for your vote for the Gutierrez-Bordallo team on August 25th. Together, let's make Guam, Guam again.
I'm Carl Gutierrez, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Team Sunshine 2018, Roy P. Duenas, Treasurer.
In the world of talk radio, there's all kinds of shows about the bizarre, the unusual, and the unexplained. But there's only one Coast to Coast.
How did we miss an asteroid that just buzzed by us? Did you hear that story?
Coast to Coast AM. It's back, and we've got it right here on The Point.
The picture that the public has is that the drug companies unleashed this on an unsuspecting public.
This is worth staying up for.
Decades of alleged child sexual abuse at the hands of Catholic priests has been chronicled in a grand jury report released by Pennsylvania's Attorney General.
The church kept meticulous records of the abuse and the cover-up. The Pennsylvania Attorney General says documents from the diocese's secret archives formed the backbone of the investigation. The report is also very harsh on Cardinal Donald Wuerl, the former Archbishop of Pittsburgh and now of D.C., for his part in concealing the sexual abuse. Wuerl issued a statement calling it a tragedy, adding that he, quote, acted with diligence, with concern for the victims, and to prevent future acts of abuse. Because of death and statute of limitations, only 2 priests are facing charges.
Fox's Trace Gallagher. 9 more victims have been recovered from the scene of a bridge collapse in Genoa, Italy. That makes 35 known dead so far.
We are now searching for people under debris in big voids. If we can find them and looking and searching in the car, and we are carrying on with these rescue operations until we finish the job.
Fire rescuer Richard Biardoni. In London, police are questioning the man who plowed his car into pedestrians and then a security barrier outside Parliament on Tuesday.
Police have, critical to the investigation really, has been having that car and being able to really trace it backwards and work out where the car was driven from, and to really use that to find out a bit more about this man's background. It would appear from what police are saying that this man was a lone wolf, but really now they are looking at working out what this man's background was and really what motivated him to carry out this attack.
Sky News correspondent Katie Spencer. The 29-year-old suspect is a British national. There's been a Taliban attack on a checkpoint in northern Baghlan province in Afghanistan. Police say 30 soldiers have been killed. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News Radio.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training every morning on The Ray Gibson Show.
You've heard it. I've heard it. 2 people get into a disagreement, and one of them says, look here, facts are facts, and they're indisputable. I'm Jerry Roberts, and at 7:20 a.m. on The Ray Gibson Show, we'll discuss why even after getting down to facts, we can still be in trouble.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point by Jerry Roberts at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts on The Ray Gibson Show on 93.3 The Point.
It's a great show. During the halftime break, I've got my Facebook up to the point again where I can read comments, and I did get a comment from Booney Dog Chamorro, to whom I shall be grateful for some time, since he tipped me off that the Land Use Commission was preparing to cite me for my tall tale sign here as being out of the regulation. But anyhow, Booney Dog Chamorro says the phone doesn't work. 888-TALK. Well, we've had a couple folks call in, Booney Dog Chamorro, so we hope it works. And if you want to give it a try, we have every indication that it works right now. 888-8255. And of course, that goes for all the rest of our international radio listening audience. If there's something that you want to talk about, whether or not it's something that's on my list here for today, give us a buzz and we'll see where it goes. I was talking about this article in the Daily News entitled "One Missing Word in Budget Spells Big Difference." And of course, we found out about that yesterday, but there's some interesting dialogue here that I think bears a little looking into. This is from Speaker B.J. Cruz. "No matter how small or unintended, this error is ours, but it would be a great shame to allow a clerical error to obstruct our mutual progress towards enacting a budget for the island and the people of Guam. For this reason, I ask that you accept the accompanying Bill 2323 in the spirit of humility with which this request is made," Cruz told the governor in his letter. Well, good shot, Speaker B.J. Cruz. You fessed up, and you're asking for cooperation. I guess we can't expect much more than that from our leaders. The governor's comment was that he hoped it wasn't a poison, that this omission was not a poison pill intended to deteriorate the stability that this administration has worked so hard to establish following federal tax cuts. And then the other part from Cruz's letter, which I read a little earlier, there was a time when the heads of each of our respective branches acknowledged human error for what it was and permitted the other to correct such error with dignity, Cruz wrote the governor. Whether you believe we have earned it or not, I ask that you allow the 34th Guam legislature to do that now. And my suspicion is that the governor will acquiesce in Speaker Cruz's request and entertain the submission of the budget to the governor that does not contain the error caused by the missing word "no." And the reason that I feel so confident in that is that we all know that they have the folks down in Adelup monitor tall tales on a daily basis, perhaps 2 or 3 people down there with headsets and voice stress analysis machines, etc., so that they know exactly what we're saying here on Tall Tales and can work with it. So they would understand that according to the age-old doctrine of equity of statute, that the governor would be well advised to take the second copy of the budget that Speaker Cruz sent over and use it as the official budget. So much for that. Chamorro Land Trust is back in the news again. They are meeting tomorrow, and I have an article here that said that talks about it a little bit. The meeting may provide clarity on how to move forward with, let me go back a little bit. The lease transactions that did not follow the law are considered null and void based on the Attorney General's opinion, but the CLTC has not yet officially made any changes to the status of the leases. The meeting next week may provide more clarity on how to move forward with this issue. Farron, that's Pika Farron, the chairman of the commission. And of course, my gloss on this whole thing here is that if it's the board, if it's Michael Bora, if it's the people who work there, only the most naive people on the island would think that the people that created that mess and benefited from that mess are the ones to now deal with it and try to straighten it out. I think it's an exercise in futility at best. And I have on past occasions given Frank Uggan high marks for his approach to dealing with the mess, and I've been very critical of Senator Tom Atta for blocking what I see as the only reasonable way before us to deal with the mess. And what I'm talking about is that Frank Uggan introduced a bill in May, which should have been passed in May, that would have frozen any activity on the part of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission and would have appointed a retired judge to come in and straighten out the mess, to promulgate rules and regulations that have never been promulgated, and to take such actions as are necessary to get the Chamorro Land Trust Commission back in shape where it can accomplish its mission, which is to grant leaseholds to eligible people here on our island, which it's not doing now, and which it made a terrible mess of during the years in which the Chamorro Land Trust Commission was in operation. Going back to this article, it goes on to say, meanwhile, the new list of leases that are void or voidable, the new list is not being released to the public until the CLTC board. Now, I wonder what the CLTC board is. There's a Chamorro Land Trust Commission made up of commissioners, and it's called a commission. It's not called a board. Let's see, this is the Post. Sorry, Post. It's not the CLTC board, it's the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. Meanwhile, the new list is not being released to the public until the CLTC board acts on it. Director of Land Management Director Michael Bora said that the list was not releasable after Farron asked about its confidentiality. Now, why would such a list be confidential? A list of leases that have been granted that are void or voidable. And this is the response from Bora. Let's say you go through it and approve this group here. We'll make a separate document that will be part of a resolution, and that will be the document that is releasable, Bora told commissioners. In other words, let's keep the public in the dark here like we've done from the very, very beginning, coming from Michael Bora, the Director of Land Management, who was known far and wide as a champion of transparency, correct? The article goes on to say, also at issue is a second review from the Attorney General specific to the Barrigada Heights leases. The AG reviewed 101 Barrigada Heights lease files. The review found 12 void leases and 66 voidable leases and 23 incomplete files. But other than stating her findings, the AG did not provide any information about these leases. Bora said he sent a letter to the AG but did not get a response. I kind of know how that one works. Bora said she assumed the AG, as you were Farron said, she assumed the AG has a list similar to what the CLTC has developed, but the commission can't be sure without confirmation. I think it would be prudent for us to have her data before we make any decisions for Barrigada Heights. A list of lease applicants who were bypassed after having waited many years is still being developed. So I think we borrowed the instruction manual from the Attorney General as to how to handle these matters that generate great public interest. We borrowed the instruction manual that the Attorney General is using for the Ray Quick Draw Tenorio affair. And the operative principle here is let's not tell the public anything. Let's keep them in the dark, especially here with this Chamorro Land Trust matter, because it's the fact that the Chamorro Land Trust was able to act in the dark for so long that resulted in all these problems. So instead of coming forward and making public which leases are problematic so that we can have some confidence in the idea that we're not just going to take those things that were fixed before and fix them again. So that's the Chamorro Land Trust. I mentioned Tom Atta's name. Frank Uggan had what I thought was the bill that would have addressed this matter squarely, but was unable to get it on for public hearing because Tom Atta, on the day that the legislature had made its first attempt to call an emergency session, Tom Atta just canceled the public hearing and has not rescheduled it yet. I see partisan politics involved here because Tom Atta is a co-chairman of the Lou and Josh campaign. Tom Atta, along with former Senator John Uggan, and Frank Uggan, of course, is a candidate for governor himself. So if one were to look at this through what I call my political prism, which I've explained before, the opportunity for Frank Uggan to come forward and apparently solve a problem would not be seen as in the interest of candidate Leon Guerrero. So this perhaps was the reason that Senator Tom Atta just canceled that hearing instead of rescheduling it a couple days later, and has not seen fit to reschedule it now, perhaps hoping to run the clock out between now and the primary election, with the desire that Frank Uggan not be seen as someone who's trying to solve this problem that is on everyone's mind. So, so much for the Chamorro Land Trust Commission scandal, transparency, Michael Borja, Frank Uggan, and Tom Atta. Next item on my card is Dr. Sam Friedman versus the status quo at GMH. This has been at the bottom of the card for a long time, and I never got to it, but since we finished the budget, there have been so few battles on the card that I'm finally getting down to it. So I want to spend a little time on this. This was also prompted by a call that we got yesterday from Barry Mead, who shared some rather interesting figures with us that were posted on Facebook, on our Facebook yesterday. If you missed it, you can go back to yesterday's episode of Tall Tales and you can get those figures. And Barry showed that 2018 through the 31st of July, 26 full-time doctors, full-time employees at Guam Memorial Hospital had been billing the hospital for work that they had done. And the totals came out like this. That doctors had billed $52,719,554.67 against total GMH billings of about $122 million. So Barry breaks it down to show that doctors who are employed by the hospital on salary, which everyone in our international radio listening audience would see as rather attractive salaries, are also billing the hospital for work they do at the hospital. Perhaps there's something that I don't understand here. If there is, maybe someone from the hospital could call and set us straight on that. But those are the raw numbers that Barry Mead got when he did a Sunshine Law request on the hospital, and those are the numbers that were produced. The matter of Dr. Friedman, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some information that Dr. Friedman put out in a column for the Post. But before I do that, maybe we could take a minute to examine who Dr. Friedman is. Dr. Friedman is an oncologist and he's been on the island for quite some time. He is a somewhat controversial figure. If you went online and Googled him, you'd find a KUAM story going back to 2011 where Dr. Friedman had been appointed to sit on the Guam Board of Medical Examiners. And during his confirmation, Friedman said patients are dying needlessly at the hospital. He specifically spoke of an incident that occurred 2 months ago when a 41-year-old woman was improperly treated during her pregnancy and as a result died while in labor at the hospital. The incident, the doctor said, is one of many that have been swept under the rug. If no one is going to learn from mistakes, how do we expect to improve patient care? The other part is the doctors, where the same thing happens. Where if one of the boys, if you're one of the boys, it gets buried. And if you're not one of the boys, the most minutiae of garbage gets dragged out for months. And Dr. Friedman says that Dr. Jerome Landstrom can speak to you about this. Friedman continued, get me a clearance from GMH Interim Administrator Vega, and I will give you a line and verse of the patients, what happened, who the doctor was, etc. Then we'll see if I'm making stuff up. Now, Friedman, in this article and in this controversy, was not unopposed. He was opposed by Dr. Thomas Shea, who is also a very, very well-known figure in the medical community. Dr. Shea said, it was really uncalled for. I think it was irresponsible, careless for him to say that doctors are killing patients. He has taken issue with Friedman's comments, so much so he wants the governor to withdraw the oncologist's nomination to the Guam Board of Medical Examiners. Shea added, I think there's a good peer review process at GMH that we follow, and a majority of our doctors here are very compassionate and caring. Dr. Shea believes that Friedman's comments have created an unnecessary sense of panic within the community about the hospital and contends that changes and improvements are occurring at GMH. I would encourage Dr. Friedman to focus on the happier side of life rather than focusing on such negativity. That's not going to help. For somebody to want to sit on the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, he needs to rise above that, Shea said. Dr. Shea said the hospital may have settled a dozen cases in the past 5 years, but he contends that medical malpractice and patients dying from complications is the norm at even the best medical facilities across the nation. Patients die at other hospitals of complications, but not because doctors are killing patients. There's a big difference between killing someone and someone dying of complications. But despite the criticism from some of his colleagues, Dr. Friedman isn't backing down or apologizing for his statements, saying patient care must be improved. That's why he's hoping to sit on the Guam Board of Medical Examiners to help bring about the change that he contends is so desperately needed. Friedman said, I could back up everything I've said and then some if the people of Guam are satisfied with the medical care that they receive at Guam Memorial Hospital, let them continue to do so. Well, Shea and other physicians and nurses get together tonight to discuss Friedman's comments and urge the governor to withdraw his nomination. Health Care Committee Chairman Senator Dennis Rodriguez sent a letter to Vega today demanding for answers on claims about preventable death of a woman in labor at GMH 2 months ago. The hospital, as KUM has reported previously, is looking into the claims. So this is something that goes back to 2011. I have another one that the Mariana's Variety of 2011 kind of reported the same way. So that's who Dr. Friedman is. I think it's fair to say that Dr. Friedman is not a shrinking violet. and it's also fair to say that he is not without controversy. So having that background on Dr. Friedman, I'm going to go into a two-part writing that he did for the Post a while ago, and see where that takes us, although the hospital is no longer kind of front and center in our thoughts because of the passage of the budget. It's still a matter of grave concern to me, and I suspect to an awful lot of other people. So what do we got? The seventh inning stretch coming up, huh? So after the seventh inning stretch, we'll come back to Dr. Sam Friedman. Why is there a medical crisis on Guam?
So you just grabbed a cup of coffee and you want to find out what's going on around Guam. Cruising through the AM radio dial, and it's the same thing. Day after day. It's been that way for years. Try something new. Flip over to the FM side and tune to 93.3 The Point. We've got Kevin Kerrigan with news. We've got Ray Gibson with the hot topics. We've got your calls at 888-8255. And we've got more coffee, too. The Ray Gibson Show, weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on Guam's only FM News Talk superstation, 93.3 The Point.
Okay. I can still hit that ball hard. Okay, so we're back to Dr. Sam Friedman and a couple of articles or a couple of op-ed pieces that he posted in the Daily Post. And he starts out with something that I think we can all agree with. He says, Guam has so much going for it, a beautiful tropical island, a friendly and generous people, and clean tourism and military. It is part of the American dream without the American nightmare of insanely divisive politics, racial problems, overbearing government and police, violent crime, areas of urban blight, and overpopulation, etc. So it's difficult to understand why we have our many divisiveness over a chronic problem that affects all of the residents, medical care on Guam, and the fate of Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. And then he goes on to say, as a self-professed curmudgeon. That was a title I always wanted. I always was thinking, you know, maybe having some T-shirts made up that say, beware of curmudgeon, or curmudgeon inside, or something like that. Anyhow, I'll let Dr. Sam Friedman be the duty curmudgeon here today. He says, as a self-proclaimed curmudgeon, I may be able to point out without prejudice some factors responsible for this, although the solutions to repair these are not easy, nor do I have all the answers. It is interesting to note in the upcoming gubernatorial race, 3 candidates on one side who profess the knowledge to ameliorate the situation have had significant opportunity to positively affect health care in the past, and all have either failed through inaction or ominously by making the problem worse. I wonder why he's saying only 3. I think all 4 of the Democrat candidates in one way or another have had a role as far as Guam Memorial Hospital is concerned. But that's what he said, and then he goes on to say, and on the other side, we hear, if anything, what problem? This, of course, would be our Lieutenant Governor, Ray Tenorio. Rather than join the ongoing limited blame debate of incompetence of GMHA management versus lack of adequate funding, let me blame all the players, GMHA management, the GMHA Board of Trustees, the senators, the governor, the doctors, the insurance companies, and finally the patients and potential patients. I'm glad he didn't mention Tall Tales in there. I will not go into allegations of corruption, rule by medical oligarchy to maintain power and enrich themselves. I wonder if that goes back to the figures that Barry Mead shared with us. So he says, political assassinations of staff wishing to change this chronic management disease and improve patient care, all of which will hopefully be exposed in the upcoming investigations. But at the very least, would any rational person seeing the pathetic exhibition and incredible incompetence of some of the GMHA management under piercing legislative questions believe that these people are capable of running a modern hospital? I'm going to repeat that statement there. Would any rational person seeing the pathetic exhibition and incredible incompetence of some of the GMHA management under piercing legislative questions believe that these people are capable of running a modern hospital? I wonder if our caller, Mary. Oh, Mary. Hi, Mary.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Mary.
I'm here.
Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, okay. No, a comment. My comment is related to the issue. I don't really know about any incompetencies personally, but we do have on Guam. I don't know the year that it was the law was passed, but unfortunately we have the medical malpractice mandatory arbitration law, and that seems, maybe, this is just thinking out loud, attracting physicians maybe who may not be as competent as we would like them to be, because they're ensured that nobody's going to sue them without having to go through mandatory arbitration. And I just wonder what your take on it is. And to my understanding, over the years, the legislatures have tried to repeal this law, but they've never been able to do it, to repeal it.
It's an interesting point, Mary. It is a rather laborious process to go through the mandatory arbitration in order to be able to sue someone who practices at GMH for malpractice. And you have kind of put your fingers on one of the purposes of what's called tort law. Tort law means suing someone who has injured you or damaged you or something like that. And in a sense, it's an elaborate system of communication. Large industrial companies are communicated with when juries bring in large verdicts against them for practices that ought to be avoided. And I suppose the reverse is true. Your point is that doctors who might be prone to malpractice suits might be attracted here because the word in the medical community is that you could do a lot here without being sued for medical malpractice because of our mandatory arbitration statute. Correct, Mary?
Yes, I'm wondering about that. And, I have a personal experience with my son, but it didn't originate with the hospital, but it's still the same thing. And I just know people. Something happened recently, and somebody commented, "Why don't they sue the? Why don't doctors support each other to help victims of poor medical practices?" Well, the arbitration, to my understanding, requires a third party, and nobody wants to be that, or rather the arbiter, nobody wants to be in that position. And the reason why I'm saying this is as I sought out a lawyer, they say no doctor wants to be in that position because this is a small island. And so then that's where it becomes expensive, because then they have to bring somebody from Hawaii, for example, or any other state to be that arbiter. And so this whole process really kind of like encourages maybe, I don't know. I don't have any support for that statement. I'm just wondering if that might be the attraction to come here, and we're not getting quite as qualified people as we should here on Guam. But I'll leave it as that, because a lot of people are not aware of that, and they're always saying, why don't we sue these doctors? Well, you can't go through that. Only you have to go through mandatory arbitration, and if they don't, if the result is not in your favor, then only then can you actually sue, and then that's double the cost, right?
That's very insightful, Mary. You're right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I've been trying to get some people interested, and I know there's one lawyer who usually is called upon to deal with these kinds of cases, and he just usually refuses them because of the process is very expensive. And you can find that it's on Chapter 10, Medical Malpractice Mandatory Arbitration, and it's a very, very detailed, and it's just really, the intent, I think, was to save people the cost of going through the process of suing a physician, for example, but instead it's becoming far more expensive because, as they say, was said, no doctor wants to be in that position to be the arbiter. So that's just a thought. If anybody else wants to bring on, I'll leave it at that. Good to hear from you, Bob.
Well, thank you very much, Mary. That's very insightful, and that's a dimension that hasn't been brought up in this Guam Memorial Hospital discussion. So thank you for sharing that with our international radio listening audience, Mary.
Maybe I shouldn't have shared it, huh? It might not be a good statement to say on air. But anyways, I'll leave you with this and hope maybe other people will comment. Bye.
Thank you very much, Mary. Yeah, mandatory arbitration. That statute's been around for like 40 years, and it would be the kind of thing that would be very difficult to muster up enough public sentiment to have it repealed, because obviously there is one group of people who see it as in their advantage in maintaining that medical malpractice arbitration statute, who have great financial interest to protect, professional interest, etc. No one who is in any kind of profession wants to get sued if he can avoid it. On the other hand, there isn't a easily identifiable group of people who would see it in their particular interest to have that statute repealed. Perhaps some of the plaintiffs bar amongst the lawyers, but even then that would be a gross mismatch. So good call, Mary. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. I'll go back here to Dr. Friedman. And Friedman says, I will not go into allegations of corruption ruled by a medical oligarchy to maintain power and enrich themselves. And I referenced Barry Mead's call and post yesterday. Political assassinations of staff wishing to change this chronic mismanagement disease and improve patient care, all of which will hopefully be exposed in the upcoming investigations. Which reminds me that Senator Dennis Rodriguez introduced a resolution to appoint an investigating committee to investigate some of the things that are going on at the hospital. And we haven't heard anything about his committee or from his committee. And once again, I hope that it isn't that Dennis hasn't borrowed the playbook from Elizabeth Barrett Anderson about how not to let the public know what you're doing with your investigation. It would be nice if Dennis came out with his report before the primary election. It could be a real boost for Dennis if, depending on how his investigation was handled and what the report is, it could also have a downside if he doesn't come forward with something before the primary election. So going back to what Dr. Friedman said, at the very least, would any rational person seeing the pathetic exhibition and incredible incompetence of some of the GMHA management under piercing legislative questions believe that these people are capable of running a modern hospital? Enough said on this subject. Then Friedman goes on to the GMHA Board of Trustees. The board should be in charge, yet allows the CEO and his staff to run wild, commit funds and critical actions without board approval, or even acquiesce to the often faulty narrative it is fed with without question. If certain board members cannot or do not wish to commit the necessary time to do a decent job, they should resign rather than continue this farce. What did he call himself here at the beginning of this? As a self-professed curmudgeon. Well, he's playing true to type here, isn't he? Then he goes on and talks about the legislature. We are seeing a flurry of recent, long overdue action by this body, with 5 senators distinguishing themselves with very well-researched and intelligent questions to the hapless GMHA management. But GMHA and medical problems have been ongoing for decades. Only a cynic would suggest that the current energy may have something to do with upcoming aims for higher office. But whatever the case, it is long overdue and most welcome. And of course, I want to add an element of practicality here. That's kind of the way a democracy works, that people who wish to be elected in a democratic system are sensitive to what it is the public, what they think the public wants to see them doing. And of course, the closer you get to the showdown known as the election, the more anxious elected officials become to show the public that which they think the public wants to see. Friedman says, whatever the case, it's long overdue and most welcome. However, it would be depressing to point out the 5 animated and perceptive senators for diverse reasons are all leaving at the end of the session. So none of the senators that Friedman thinks who have really burrowed into this problem are going to be back next time. And you know why? A couple of them have retired or they're running for other office, etc. And we are going to have an extremely green crop of senators this next time around. I think Mary Torres, if she's reelected, might very well be the senior member of the 35th Guam legislature. We are all aware of, Friedman goes on, current and past governors, we are all aware of actions and misdirected actions of former governors regarding GMHA. But let's deal with the current situation. I firmly believe Governor Eddie Calvo came into office with a genuine will to improve GMHA. He assumed Organic Act of Guam powers to drain the GMHA swamp by firing the then chief executive officer, who ironically has been resurrected as the current CEO. So the governor put the same guy on that he fired when he first came into office, put him back on the job. And most of the Board of Trustees who did not resign. Previously, Governor Camacho thought in his naivety and goodwill that the appointment of anyone to management could improve the inherited mess, and that the information he was being fed by some of these people was accurate and devoid of selfish interest. Also, like so many people untrained in medicine, hearing the diverse stories from medical professionals about how to run a medical care facility can be downright confusing. So I've got a break coming up. I've got somebody on hold. Is that right, Real Joe?
Our Carl is on hold.
Our Carl. So our Carl, if you can hang on until after the, let's see, I think, is it last call?
Call to post.
Yeah, so it's the home stretch. So hang on, our Carl, and we'll get to you then.
Half a day. This is Jerry Gutierrez. Many remember how committed Carl has been to helping our people during times of hardship, disaster, and financial crisis throughout his years of public service. For Carl, it has always been about people helping people. He would like this opportunity to work on your behalf once again as your governor. I humbly ask for your vote for the Gutierrez-Bordallo team on August 25th. Together, let's make Guam again.
I'm Carl Gutierrez, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Team Sunshine 2018, Roy P. Duenas, Treasurer.
And they're off. And it's our Carl in the lead. You're leading the pack, Carl.
Hey, Bob. Good afternoon.
Howdy.
Yeah, as usual, I'm really very interested in what you're talking about. I have a very deep vested interest in what's going on at GMH. I grew up on the island. I was born at the old GMH. And my family has been periodically touched by GMH. Most recently, my wife, when she had her 6-year battle with breast cancer before she lost it, she almost lost her life up at GMH because of mishandling of her port. I wrote a letter in about the incident to the then GM, Mr. Vargas, and I also wrote an email to JACO. And after several weeks, many weeks, I finally got a response from both, and they said, basically, in not so many words, we've looked into it, and we don't think this is worth pursuing, so they just brushed it under the rug. And so my wife, almost losing her life, she had a bacteria enter through her port because of mishandling, and a Pseudomonas virus over the course of several weeks almost killed her. And I wasn't trying to sue GMH. I wanted them to make a record of it and resolve the problem that caused it. Was it a staff member? Was there any pattern of incompetence? We'll never know. It's like it never even happened. I believe that the solution to this, as with many things with GovGuam, is to outsource as much as possible. I was listening to an interview of Senator Rodriguez several weeks ago on your competition, and he was talking about a legislative initiative of some kind where they went out and they got proposals from various companies that run hospitals, and from what I heard, he seemed to convey that they got some very good proposals, and then it all basically fell through the cracks. So all that time and money spent gathering information on possibly having some public-private partnership of some kind just up in smoke. So anyway, I believe we need to outsource. If there's anything that needs to be outsourced, we need to get government's hands out of the hospital. It's a life and death situation. Unfortunately, they show very little interest in giving up power and territory, even when it's at the sacrifice or near sacrifice of human life. And that is just terrible.
I can't say that I disagree with you, Carl. I think you make some really good points. What about just selling the hospital outright?
Yeah, I'm not sure what would be the best alternative. It would be, because I'm not an expert in those things, it would be worth talking to people that deal with this kind of stuff and see what would be the best scenario. Would it be best to just sell it outright, or to have someone, a private, like what the Israelis, do in their operation? They own the property of their hotels, they own the building, and then they go out to the marketplace and they get various proposals for companies that run hotels all around the world. For example, Marriott Corporation runs over 2,000 hotels all over the world. They've got human resources, IT systems, maintenance systems. They've got all these dozens and dozens of systems tested over decades, and they come in here and they don't reinvent the wheel. So that's what I'm thinking about. But maybe it would be just better to just outright sell it. I couldn't tell you.
Well, Carl, I think we have to agree that something must be done. We can't continue on the way we've been going and keep our fingers crossed and hope that things will work out better than they have, because it doesn't seem like they've ever worked very well, correct?
Yes, and GMH is now running up against competition by privately run hospital, and the Guam Regional Medical Center is on the grow. They're building their next phase, and so they really need to get in gear, because they're publicly. GMH is a publicly run hospital. It's inefficiently run. It doesn't need to respond to a lot of these signals that a private company has to, like profits and losses. They can just basically dump trucks of money down into a money pit, and who cares? Just go back to the legislature and ask for more of it. But that's us. That's our taxpayers' money. So yeah, very frustrating.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Carl, and thanks for sharing your rather unfortunate experience with us too. We appreciate that.
Sure, Bob, and thank you for the very interesting shows every afternoon. I always look forward to it. I was a bit late today, but I always learn something.
Well, I won't mark you tardy this time, Carl.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. So long. Well, that was our Carl sharing a little bit of his own story concerning the hospital. And I think as we get into what Dr. Friedman says in what I'm reading here, he kind of echoes what Carl says, that if no one pays attention to what in everyday language we would call screw-ups, there isn't much chance that the screw-ups will end. So I'm going to go back here to Dr. Friedman. We're getting pretty close to the Bolero part of the program, so I'm going to see how far I can get with Dr. Friedman tomorrow. We'll pick him up, today, and we'll pick him up tomorrow. So if you have anything you want to say about Guam Memorial Hospital, medical care, etc., make a note, and Tall Tales tomorrow will be the place to talk about GMH, medical care, and related subjects. So Dr. Friedman says that Governor Felix Camacho thought in his naivete and goodwill that the appointment of anyone to management could improve the inherited mess, and that the information he was being fed by some of these people was accurate and devoid of selfish interest. Also, like so many people untrained in medicine, hearing diverse stories from medical professionals about how to run medical care can be downright confusing if potential benefits acquired by people making the recommendations are not assessed. A kind of a self-explanatory sentence there. If someone is making a recommendation to you as to how you should run your business, and that person will benefit if you adopt his recommendation, you want to make sure that of that person's bona fides, so that his advice is more than just self-serving. Friedman goes on and says, well, there have now been 5 CEOs during this administration's term, and I don't know how many CFOs, which should tell most people that there was not only smoke, but a conflagration of massive proportions long before it became a crisis. We understand, Governor, that the medical profession must shoulder much of the blame for your confusion, but honestly, to insist that money will solve the problems is to live in a Trump-like world of denial. A Trump-like world of denial. When 32 of 41 defects outlined by the Centers for Medicare and Medical Services report pointed to managerial incompetence and not financial matters. I have not heard one critic of GMH not say more money was needed, but that the incompetence had to be corrected and other sources of funds identified and made available before yet more burden was placed on the people of Guam. That's a pretty good place to stop for today. And as I mentioned, we'll pick up with this tomorrow, talk about GMH, medical care, the current political postures with respect to those 2 issues, and other interesting topics that perhaps the most interesting international radio listening audience that any station appeals to could share. So thank you very much. See you tomorrow.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Closing arguments today in the Manafort trial. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Paul Manafort's defense resting yesterday without presenting a case.
It was really the first time that we've seen Manafort stand